Our topic on hand today is demystifying Africa. Hey, and welcome back to another episode of Rhythm and Rome. I am here with my two lovely co-hosts, Trecia and Benef. How are you guys doing today? What up? Anyway, I'm overexcited. Sorry,
Yeah,
because
you're on fire, man.
no, I
And
literally
you're Paul, just so we know who you
and I'm
are
Paul,
as well.
and already I'm hyper as it is already, but I already just finished eating like my second ice cream, so bear with me. But either way, yeah, guys, we have a great show. But before we get started and so on, I have to plug in like what Rhythm and Rome is all about. We're here. We always discuss things on our travels, travel adventures, and exploring cultures and cultural differences and any similarities and misconceptions and everything else that's in between there. So basically, we talk a lot of good shit. And I'm not saying shit in a bad way, so calm down, people. You can tell I'm all hyped up from all that sugar.
We love
But
it.
anyway, yeah. So discussion today, our topic on hand today is demystifying Africa. Now, this is actually going to be a two-part episode, which I think is really, really cool. And I love the fact that we're doing this because I have to embarrassingly confess something. Okay. My ass have not been to Africa yet, and I'm embarrassed. Now, I don't count the Sinai Peninsula because I did that when I was working for the government.
I mean, it's
so that don't
still
count.
Africa.
I know, but when people say, "Oh, I'm going to visit Africa," they don't say the Sinai Peninsula.
Well, I mean, they might say North Africa. Real quick, I just want to say that the demystifying the continent, I got that from another person that we're going to interview, Mike Burns. So it's not
Yes,
not
from the
our
Burns
phrase.
brothers.
The Burns brothers,
But
yes.
I wanted to put that out there because it does need to be demystified. I mean, when I think I
Absolutely.
asked my daughter, what do you think of when you think of Africa? And she's like, the jungle.
Mm.
Which I was like, all right. And my husband's like, war, like countries like
Always,
actively
yeah,
fighting each other,
Right.
tribes, like huts, poverty, like all of this stuff that we think about, which is there is some of
Which
that,
is
yes, but that's not all there is.
but
I
correct.
think that's
yeah. Go ahead, Trisha. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, no, I was just saying a lot of all of the negative things, and that's
yeah,
basically
right, right.
what we've all been speaking on.
Yeah,
And I mean, in I guess in all fairness, when we're speaking of other countries, or if we're looking to the news to find out any information, that's all they're going to highlight, right? So there is not a lot of
Well,
positive that
yeah.
comes out of that.
And we probably need to specify that today or for this series we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, not Northern Africa.
well, we
Because it's
may
all
touch some
Africa.
stuff on there. It's all Africa, but we might
Well,
jump
but the
all over
people
the
that
map.
we're interviewing, I feel like are dealing mostly with sub-Saharan Africa.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Like,
They are.
but don't
yeah,
forget, we wanted to give the continent,
yeah.
a little bit more than what most people probably know,
But it's
right?
so
So
vast, though, and that's I
vast, you're
mean,
right.
it's so
Yeah,
diverse. So, like
absolutely.
Northern Africa is all of it's just completely different than sub-Saharan
Exactly.
Africa. Like the people
You're
are different,
absolutely
the
right.
language is different, the culture is different.
Hmm.
It's
And
not
then
the same.
South Africa is the same, and Sub-Sahara, like you said. But it's interesting because, and it makes me feel some type of way too as well, that this continent, I feel a lot of time, even though it is well traveled, I believe, but the stigma that goes with it is worrisome a bit because obviously this continent is the oldest continent, and but it travels. I mean, because there's negative stuff way back if
Well,
we look at it.
why haven't you been, Paul? Let's ask
So,
ourselves this
but
question.
that is what I don't know. I think the
You
reason
don't
why,
know?
no, honestly, I think the reason why, and it's not because of money. I think the reason why it has to do with how we were taught or brought up. And for me, it is literally because of the negativity that I said, okay, if I go, I don't want to go by myself. And I, a person that is not afraid to travel by myself, but because of what you hear and what you read, and Trecia allude to it, you get that negative vibe that something's going to happen to you. Now, why do I get the negative vibe there, but I will travel Eastern Europe where no one looks like me, and I'm okay with that? That's fucked up in my head. And I
Yeah.
blame myself for that. And I think it's because of how we are ingrained, like things are ingrained in our head of what's good and what's bad. I think we see it politically too, as well, where we're, and I don't want to get politics in this, but when we're talking about immigration and folks would say, why don't we get someone from Norway versus Africa? Like I don't get it. Like, why do we think that?
Well, I mean, so
I do want to go.
yeah,
and I'm going this year.
but that doesn't happen for everyone, because your friend Amielle did never had that
Yes.
perception of Africa at all, and I think that stemmed from her parents. So I think that it you know it's not the same. Like not everyone in the United States is going to think Africa bad, dark continent,
Yeah.
don't go.
And
Right.
you're right. Go ahead, Trecia. Sorry.
Well, well, I personally don't think that either when it comes to Africa. I personally, I think of wealth. I think of royalty. I think of what's the other words that I've kind of put beauty,
Yeah.
vastness,
It's
and I think
luscious
so much.
and
So yes,
yeah.
lush, so much to learn. I mean, so much wealth of minerals, of people, of knowledge, things that I have not discovered. So it's
Yeah.
definitely on my list to go. It's not one that I've it's not lack of not wanting to seek it, but it's just for me, it was fiscal because
Yeah.
of how expensive it is and the things that you have to do to get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then again, I had kids too, right? So, to have that experience, still, it was an excuse. No, it was it a good excuse. No, if I really wanted to go, I should have done it.
Yeah.
But it's not going to stop me. If anything, it's not going to stop me now.
Yeah.
So definitely want
Absolutely.
to get there.
I mean,
And I could
I feel
say, yeah, go ahead.
I think if I had had the opportunity to go, like for work, like I was able to go to Korea and Japan, then I would have been super excited about it, because I wouldn't have felt completely alone in the process versus me
Right.
just trying to
Yeah.
plan travel, which is another
Right.
reason to, have a travel agent. But it's so, like, there's so much unknown that I think I shied away from it and like put it off to bucket list, do it later,
Wait, go
because
back. You said there's a lot of unknown. How is that a lot of unknown, but there was not a lot of unknown when you went to Europe or when you traveled to Asia
that was my whole
or
point, because I had work sponsoring me that
in
made it
Europe?
easier. No, not for me in Europe, but Europe I didn't say was unknown for me. I feel like Europe is familiar. That I Europe, the culture is more similar to us. It's a Western culture. I don't have that same fear of the unknown like I do with the vastness
Yeah,
of
I think
Africa.
I think it's the word that I'm probably held up on because of the
Okay.
fact that the similarity or familiarity or whatever you want to call the word. I feel like it is like that in the major cities in Africa. I mean, I've never been, but from what we see when we go to South Africa, like for example,
Well, I don't see
there's
anything because I haven't been, but that's what
no, I'm saying
Amielle
on
was
TV
telling
because I
us.
haven't
She
been
was saying it
either on
is
TV.
similar. I mean,
I know exactly what you're saying, Benef,
I
in
haven't
that.
seen any cities, to be honest. Because and that's what was so surprising from her interview, was
Mhm.
that there is the modernness there that we
Well,
could, that
and,
I
and
just didn't doesn't track,
yeah.
doesn't I don't think about it.
I mean, I was thinking in the sense of because of what we see on TV, and because neither one of us, all three of us, can agree that we've not been to Africa except for my, Sinai Peninsula, which
Well,
doesn't
what
for me
TV, like I'm not seeing the
or
same
TV.
thing. So which TV shows are you talking about?
So when Nelson Mandela was around, South Africa was very popular and shown on TV a lot. The movement when his biopic was filmed, that was a taste of us being able
Okay.
to see what South Africa was like.
Okay.
any, even shows or movies that have things to do with safari. Like safari is so popular on Western culture. We will go to a safari in a heartbeat. But
Yeah, but the
yet
things
it's
that
still negative for us.
yeah, I mean,
You know what I mean?
safaris aren't negative for me, but I haven't seen
I'm saying in general.
like modern cities in movies. They're like Hotel Rwanda, like that was all about genocide and war. Like those are the movies I'm seeing, unfortunately.
Right.
No, Invictus, the Invictus game. I mean, the whole thing was in South Africa.
Right.
The whole film, yeah, was in South
Okay,
Africa.
well, I
and they
haven't seen
showed the
that
city.
film.
Well, she's saying just based on what she's seen.
Yeah.
That's kind of that is the depiction that she has.
Right. I failed to mention how, I know Amielle and stuff like that. Amielle and I and Trecia, we all went to high school all together. And Amielle was, she's going to laugh when I say this, but I always classify her as, my sister from another mother because, she was this lily blonde, blue eye girl from Huntington, but she ran like she was a sprinter and she can kick ass in running, which shocked the hell out of everyone on the track team, which majority of us were the same color. And then she went ahead and she became a doctor, a PhD. So Dr. Amielle DeWan. And I'll let her give her take on all the, hiccups that at least I have and why it's been kind of like, oh my God, I feel embarrassed kind of moment.
So born and raised in New York, grew up with Paul here running track and shenanigans in our youth.
Yes.
I've lived all over the US and internationally. I am currently the founder and executive director of an organization called Impact by Design. We are a mission-driven consulting firm that works with organizations that are mission-driven across the globe and helping them improve the way they make a difference for animals and people. So my background is primarily in the wildlife conservation context. I spent many years doing field work in the US and in Africa, and I'm a wildlife biologist by training. I have my PhD in ecology and statistics.
And I should say I apologize for not introducing you as Dr. Amielle DeWan. So I apologize, doctor.
That is fine. That is fine.
I want to make sure to give you your respect and credit.
Thank you. Yeah. And I think the connection for us here is that I've always wanted to travel. I always had that travel bug, as you all do, but I found a job that allowed me to travel as part of my work and explore and support organizations and people or do research across the globe in a way that supports communities, supports animals, supports people. And I'm very lucky to find that pathway for myself.
Now, going a little bit further, how did, living, for example, in Africa, shape your perspective on culture and so anything similar to this too as well, your perspective on traveling?
Yeah, and just a little nugget of history. Don't remember exactly what it was that inspired me at a very young age, like to totally pinpoint it. But I had my parents were in the first and second class of the Peace Corps ever.
Oh, wow.
And that's where they met. They met in Sierra Leone. So I grew up listening to Miriam Makeba and African music, and we had lots of we had this queen's chair that's just a little stool in my living room. And so it was talked about a lot, but my passion was always for animals. So I grew up watching PBS and Nova and the old school kind of biologists who were out in the field. Jane Goodall obviously was a huge kind of I wanted to be them. And so I found a study abroad program in my undergrad that was in Kenya. It was focused on wildlife conservation. So it's a school for field studies. I did my study abroad program outside of Nairobi on a wildlife research kind of ranch conservation area. loved it, changed my life. Got the opportunity to live solo in Cameroon. I do think there are a lot of misconceptions about countries in Africa, and the countries in Africa are vastly different, both in how they feel, what the cultures are like, what the music is, what the food's like, what the infrastructure is like. And so, you know, I've spent time in Rwanda and Tanzania and Kenya, which are and South Africa, which feel very similar roads and safety. Well, there's a safety thing in certain places as it is everywhere. But I think when people think about Africa, all they think about is poverty and like small mud homes and little kids without shoes and shirts on. And there absolutely is some of that. But I think what people forget is, you know, there are some cities in Africa, Cape Town, Johannesburg, Dar es Salaam, and Nairobi. They are incredibly modern. The nicest mall I've ever been to is actually in Nairobi, on the planet.
I am. I'm more mad at myself that I don't know much about this fucking continent.
Agreed. And it's so huge. I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, so embarrassed and mad at myself.
Sub-Saharan is the majority of it. So the Sahara, you know, is at the 30 parallel.
Yeah, I know. But when you say, even when we say, and I'm not saying this because I'm picking things, even when we say the word sub-Sahara, it sounds poor. It sounds negative. It sounds, that's where Darfur is. That's where all the
because some
land.
of it is poor, and we can get into, I mean, the reasoning is colonialism. That's why everything's fucked up there.
Well, can we really say that's the reason?
To take all the resources, the people being the British and the French and every other fucking European country, they take all the resources and then they just did him out of there and let the people and then they started drawing lines and shit as if that was going to make it better. This is my little tiny piece. And the lines think when you redrawn, when the countries claim independence, I mean, it's just chaos.
And then the laws. Well, the chaos comes when, I mean, just look at how we did when we took over, Middle East with Iraq. When you don't have a government ready to be in place once they leave, that's where the problem lies. And then you have
the government, who's creating the government? And generally it's the colonial powers that are putting these people in power that are probably elitists. So just a minority of the population that are the richest. And the point
what it is
of this podcast is to, confront that, our ignorance, our misconceptions. This is a misconception episode. And travel there, because as she noted that, if we travel there, then we'll actually see the similarities that these modern cities have with our cities of the US, of Europe. The people are the same. They want the same damn things that we do. They want, access to clean water and healthy food and good jobs and good education.
There's more to it than safari.
Yeah. Clearly. There's vast wilderness to be sure, but there's people living there with their daily lives.
And quite comfortably, actually, because from what I've seen, when it comes to real estate, there are some beautiful homes there. And, for the cost per square footage that you can get there versus what you can get here, it's actually it's affordable, depending, same thing, depending if you're right in the middle of town versus, if you're a little bit on the outskirts. So it's a beautiful place to be with again, rich culture, rich minerals, as far as, you get land, you get sea, you get, vista. It really is, encompasses, quite a bit from what I've read. She spoke about feeling safe. And which is interesting, because so far we've talked about the negative, and yes, we've talked about positive, but for herself, as being a white female, going into, these different parts of Africa, rural versus city, whatever that is, and feeling perfectly safe.
There are unsafe places everywhere.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely. I mean, New York in itself,
Right. And within all of those African countries, they all have different kind of pockets or areas that are unsafe. I mean, I generally felt or feel really safe when I travel there. When I lived in Cameroon, it was very, very rural. I mean, again, no running water. This was in the late 90s. So there was no cell phones, there was no Wi-Fi, there was none of that. I didn't have a car. But now when you go to most of these places, you can do the same thing that you do when you travel everywhere else.
So, so the rural areas that she visited and the cities, it's kind of interesting what she said about how comfortable she was. And my question is if she can feel comfortable in an environment, and maybe it is equated to us, and I should say Paul and and Benef and how we are moving spaces. We move in these white spaces back home. We feel safe in these areas. We buy homes in these areas. We educate our children in these areas where we're typically, you can count on your hand how many families, where we worship, where we shop, where we do those things and we feel perfectly safe. Well, to a degree. But, you know, but for her to go, what's the difference for her in those spaces? How does she feel perfectly okay versus how we feel okay?
I think it's
Have you
a
ever thought
matter.
about that?
Yeah, I've thought about something similar to that because, like I said, South Africa, out of all the destinations in Africa that I really want to see, is South Africa, and I think the Nelson Mandela story is what got me to it. But I always thought about that same question you mentioned, Trecia, because um, I honestly think it's because certain things are embedded or ingrained in us or educated in us to make us act and talk the way we're talking. Like, why? And I get it, Benef, when you said we have similarities with Europe or whoever else, which is why we're okay with going there. I personally think that the reason why we're okay in going to Europe is because Europe looks like most of people in America versus going to Africa.
My thing is that growing up in a predominantly white area myself, having both grown up in New York as well as did schooling or academics here in Texas. I did things. I did sports. I did tennis. I did all these things that were not considered sports, right? Or necessarily where archery, different things, badminton, things that are
Yeah.
not typically associated with a Black experience, if you will. But participated in these areas, but felt comfortable. But as an adult, knowing and having a now a reference to what it is to be Black in America versus being Black traveling versus possibly living somewhere else as an expat. And Paul, you can speak to that. They're three different things, and being able to feel comfortable versus now us having children go, and the best reference I can give is that when we played other white schools or we went somewhere to other white schools, you knew what to expect. But what if you went to a predominantly Black area and now you're playing mostly Black? You're not used to that type of culture, right? So how does that fit to you? Because now your white friends are looking at you like you're supposed to know what's going on. And you're like, but dude, I've been with you the whole time. So what do I know what's going, you know what I'm saying? You see what I'm saying?
I think it's, like I
Because
said, it's those stereotypes.
Well,
I
so was
think.
she,
Yes.
but I mean, was she brought up primarily in African spaces? I mean, her parents were part of the Peace Corps. I mean, so maybe that was just always
So-
something that was comfortable.
and that's what I
You
mean by
mean-
feeling
so-
comfortable. Our comfort
Yeah.
versus her comfort
Yeah.
level when she, her going.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I mentioned to her as well because in no time, and I don't know how much you remember of Amielle, Trecia, when we were back in school, but
Mhm.
no time did I thought when I see Amielle, and she's gonna laugh again, that Africa was gonna be what
Like
I
her
think.
place. Yeah, where she went.
Like,
And
there's
kind of her mission. Yeah.
nothing, like I saw her again, and this is where the stereotypes come in, as probably be a doctor somewhere or a writer somewhere. And, I didn't even know her parents were was the first, I believe, of
She
the
said
Peace
first and
Corps.
second cohorts.
Second, yeah.
Yeah, in the Peace Corps.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, okay, so first of all, a lot of us don't know, I would say at that age in high school, we certainly don't know. I mean, hell, you and I didn't even know we had Caribbean backgrounds and we were friends in high school. You would think that we would know that, right? But we didn't know
I would have
that until
thought.
we actually
Yeah.
started speaking as adults. I mean, there's certain
Yeah.
conversations you just don't have when you're in high school. I mean, you're trying
Yeah.
to survive day to day.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
and different, whatever we're influenced in, or influenced by, I should say, from our parents, from experiences and different things, you never know where that trajectory is going to take you in life, and kind of where you're put at or to, or where your life will lead you. What I'm saying is it's obvious that her parents had a great impact on her to say,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
that, they're,
Yeah.
no one's
Yeah.
different. It doesn't matter what your
Yeah.
skin is. You can make a difference wherever you're planted. And that you should not be afraid to achieve what you need to achieve. So yes,
Mhm.
definitely the benefit of travel is definitely it's going to help with those cultural barriers and the breakdown of that, right? If you can expose you have that opportunity and the funds and the money and the resources, that you do in education, that you can to introduce your children to that as much as possible or as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Is immense. I cannot
Mhm.
express that enough. Why you'll see a lot of colleges and universities and that sort of thing offer the study abroad, and that, as part of the
Absolutely.
curriculum.
I
And
would
some of
also say how we travel is important, because you can do a lot of just like surface stuff. And Amielle talked about that, because I could go and stay in my nice Hilton or my nice Marriott and see only like the surface part of Africa, but she really recommended going deeper and
Mhm.
interacting with the locals, maybe doing a smaller local tour to have more authentic experiences than like the Hilton,
Right.
or like
But I
the
think we touched on that.
sanitized safari.
We want to be able to bring
Demystify.
yes, to demystify or to put in to bring to light the positive,
Yes.
with our two guests. You know, I do want us to touch on something here, because Amielle did speak on some challenges.
The biggest challenge for me in Africa as a white person is understanding the history of colonialism in the area and how that influences how people interact with you. So I think one of my so in Kenya, for example, the Swahili word for white person is mzungu, which is a little bit pejorative. It has a connotation of wealth, of maybe a little bit of racism, maybe a little bit of a lack of understanding. It's like what is the word? Gringo, right? When it's similar to that kind of word. It's complicated. The word
that's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah, and the word jambo is a Swahili word for hello. But if you walk down the street in Nairobi and people ask you for money, they go up to you and they say jambo, jambo, right? And so you're a white person, you learn the word jambo, you think that they're speaking Swahili to you, but it's a very like African to white expat type. There's an expat community, which is also a little bit strange. The sort of colonial history of it makes it a little weird. There's weird.
And it's made, I'm glad you mentioned the colonialism part of it too as well, because I think that part is always forgotten in a sense, because people forget majority of a lot of these countries in Africa, the Brits and the French, settled in some capacity too as well.
But she said, as a white person, biggest thing for her was understanding colonialism, or I should say colonialism, and how that influences how people interact with her, and specifically how people interact with her there in Africa, obviously, because that's where she is. What's your take on that? What just on that statement alone, what do you think that means?
It's like the image that they have of white people. So that symbolizes a lot for them. And that it's very complex. And how does a white person understand that? I don't know. And that's what she was saying with like the name that they would call them in Swahili. I mean, it was just it's not like very one or the other. The white
Right.
person there's a long history there of all kinds of things that are bad and maybe some good. I don't know.
And I think Amielle, Dr. DeWan, her team, impact by design, her team is doing great work and sharing and showing what the land, the richness of Africa is all about. And just listening to her story and how passionate she is, like kudos to her, for doing stuff like that. And I love the fact that, she's not only talking about, the animal rights and what the animal preservation or reservation, I don't know what to say, but
Preservation.
yeah.
Yeah.
And how she's talking about that and the great things with the economies there and stuff like that. And that's something that we need to showcase and let folks know. It is great to travel, but I don't want you to just take it from me, because I know I have not been there the way I want to be there, but my ass is going there. And I'm not going to say it any, more direct than that, but I'm going there. Please do visit this lovely continent. And as always, if you have any feedback or any information about what we talked about, please, by all means, tell us in the comment section down below and stuff like this. And also, please do not forget, if you haven't already, subscribe to our great podcast. And as usual, thank you so much for your support. And thank you so much for listening or watching. Until next time, peace out.